Pugly is my nickname, Pugly Ji. Honored mad person. I just make my own movies. Not many saw Salam Bombay right under their noses. I did theatre in the daytime in New York, and in the evening I sold Paneer Mattar. I used to call Dhobi ka kutta na ghat ka na ghar ka.
That you didn't like Shashi Tharoor too much.
I didn't dislike him, but I didn't like kissing him.
Mira, do you think that everyone in effect is an actor?
Not at all.
Okay.
And most look so bloody.
You're talking about a low phase in your career, Mira, when you made Kama Sutra.
I remember feeling like I wanted to burn every print that existed of that film. We spoke a clean English and we were taught to speak like I'm speaking, which is very different from, yeah, come on, yeah, what's up? Yeah, it's very different from now. Indian Airlines announcing the flight to Calcutta. Ye mera diva. I just love that song. If you become Sam for Samudrika, I'll come and personally beat you up.
Hello and welcome to Sit with Hitlist, our award-winning, totally unscripted podcast and print series where we feature our favorite people from the films. With me is Mira Nair, let's just say practicing a professional filmmaker for over 40 years. And I think just calling her a filmmaker would be an understatement, honestly. I think she is an absolute filmmaking institution in her own right. Mira, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. That's quite an introduction, dear Mayank.
I think your first film would have been 79, if I'm not mistaken, the first documentary that you made.
Yes, Jama Masjid Street Journal. But
right.
To hear 40 years is a little bit like, oh my God.
Well, it's been great 40 years though. Right now you're of course in New York. You were in Bombay right before this. Mira, would that be correct? Before the pandemic started?
Yes, not in Bombay, in Delhi and in Lucknow.
Right.
I left India this year in January to go and edit The Suitable Boy. We had just finished shooting in late December across northern India. And so in January 6th, I left beautiful Delhi and came to very grey and rainy and wet fucking London. But and anyway, it was. But we edited for about 2.5 months. And then I happened to come to New York for a weekend to see my son and never went back because the world had changed and we all moved into editing remotely.
I don't want to sound like a tax man, but just out of curiosity, you have a home in Bombay that we know of. I mean, there's a Malabar Hill place that you're usually staying.
My Asha Nani's home.
And then there is a home in London, I'm presuming, which is where
not at all. You are presuming all bunkam.
Okay, there's a home in Delhi.
Main home is Delhi, Nizamuddin, and Kampala.
Do you have a place in South Africa too? Because you lived there for some time.
And
there's New York, of course.
And New York City, yeah.
That does make you like a proper global filmmaker, like an international. So. In a sense, that is not Western idea of global. Like genuinely, Kampala, Asia, Africa, and North America.
The best continents.
The best three continents.
Asia and Africa.
Well, not North America. You're not a fan anymore of America, or because it's Trump's America.
I'm grateful to New York City, to being a New Yorker, but many times I think New York is not America.
Right.
We don't know. Sometimes I feel after so many years here, we don't know the real America. And we'll know on Tuesday again.
We will, November 3rd. We have this conversation on the 1st of November for people who will be viewing this much later, many months later perhaps. But my big question here, Mira, and I've been meaning to ask you since the namesake actually. And one of the things that struck me when I watched the film, and perhaps because of the issues that was dealing with, is also of the insider and the outsider, especially for the migrant, when they move from a place and to another land that they inhabit thereafter. Mira, for you personally, someone who lives in the US, has worked with the studio system, has worked as an independent filmmaker. I'm presuming a lot of people around you who are so-called, without, quote unquote, natives, would see you as an Indian filmmaker. Whereas in India, especially Bombay, because Bombay has what you call a Bollywood or a film industry of its own, people in Bombay will see you as a New York-based filmmaker. Is that something that you've had to deal with, this whole like Camus sort of way, the outsider, being the outsider regardless of where you are?
Yes, and no as well, because very early on, not that I pursued the path, but very early on, right from my first documentaries, I understood that the only way for me to be is to use the confusion in my work, but I did that a little bit by hindsight, but because initially it was confusing and I used to be, like, suffer with it myself, that I used to call dhobi ka kutta na ghat ka na ghar ka, ke India, I'm a sort of novelty. Even my own family didn't see my documentaries because they were so peculiar, and Cinema Verite was not known, and living with strippers in Ghatkopar nightclub and then going to Muhammad Ali Road with another family and all. It was like Mira is not around these days,
Lost
like,
it.
I was not, I was persona non grata with the family for sure, because I was doing weird things, um, and then more than that, it was a question of who am I speaking to, finding an audience. And in India, I would go with the reel of India Cabaret under my arm, 16 mm, and go to like unions, go to women's groups, go to film festivals, of course, go to secretary association, like
Right.
working groups, labor groups. And I would just say, chalo, with the projector and show my film. That was what I did. And I did get a lot from it, but but there was no other way to make sure it was seen and discussed, so there was that, I guess, the loneliness of the pioneering type of way of showing documentaries, anyway. So, but then, as you keep making the craft, I began to inure myself to who thinks I'm this and who thinks I'm that. I mean, they can call me a New York filmmaker and like Bombay, but the fact is that not many saw Salam Bombay right under their noses. I mean, it was the life around us, right? And what happens sometimes when we live in it all the time is that you have to, or you do numb yourself to it. You don't see what is in front of you. And I guess one real energy that comes from coming and going, not constantly, but knowing you have one foot there and one foot, is that you see the ordinary with different eyes. You feel it more. I guess I did, speaking for myself. I see something more, almost more passionately. So and then, of course, there are subjects that deal with this seesaw of exile and longing, and not that I'm only going to do that, but I know I have a way into that is personally felt, and personally lived in, like in the namesake, or in so many things, in a reluctant fundamentalist, and I think making cinema is really lends itself to that state of the seesaw, sometimes more effectively than literature, because it actually, in its cutting, in its dialectic sort of juxtaposition of this with that, you can create an energy that is a third thing, that people who have lived between worlds, to use that example, immediately understand or feel the fragrance of, so that's also something I learned in the early days.
But Mira, what I'm trying to get at is that when you moved back in the late 70s and also the 80s for that matter, I mean, now, of course, we see a lot of South Asian representation. And, there's the Mindy Kalings of the world, and Aziz Ansari's and Hassan Minaj of the world. I mean, to be brown-skinned would have been seriously exotic to be in the entertainment or show business, as it were, right? You're not white, you're not black. If one were to like find you in the midst of something, like I came across this information, which I did not know, is that when you made your first film, you rented the place you edited with Spike Lee. And then both of you were renting the same
24 hours, 12 hours each, discount price. Huh.
So would you then be seen as more a person of color and perhaps, find yourself being closer to that lot that's also struggling to enter show business in the same way that they still are? But
yes.
For a brown person, would have been even more and tougher, right?
Yes. There was no power of a group. None at all, none at all. And there was no even way of looking at, your brown. Like, I mean, it wasn't so overt or seen that way. The label I used to deride was the exotic, flower, or the tropical. Not, they wouldn't say tropical, but exotic. It was more that, but I would just laugh it off. But I was aware of it very much so. And but what was interesting was, at that time in New York, there was a lot of alternative ways to make art. So there was like basement collectives where you could rent. It was Young Filmmakers Video Arts. Now I'm on their board. Now I support them because they really helped me out. So you rent a cubicle, and you do your films in that cubicle. And then you graduate to a room that Spike and I shared, because we wanted to. It was also subsidized, but it was still, we subsidized ourselves further by doing 12 hours. And so there were systems, though, that existed that you could work like that, in which it didn't matter if you were brown or black. I mean, you rarely saw, that is true, a person of color. You rarely saw that. I didn't at all, besides Spike later. But I have to say that the atmosphere was very progressive, so that you didn't feel this or that. It's more in the subjects I was doing. What I was doing was not something that I could fluidly share without falling into the trap of, seeing. That was what the challenge, I think, that time was, which was its own interesting challenge, that you had to make films that need not be explained. I refuse to pander, and I still refuse to pander, but that need not be explained, and yet not make it so that it is clear only to them, or it is not of us. That is the Damocles sword that I've always worked on, I think. And now I feel like I know it, but sometimes I still don't, Yeah.
So are you suggesting at some level, like, this difference between what would be considered niche and mainstream? Is that what you're saying? Like, mainstream being something that everyone can understand?
No, I don't mean that. I mean that to resist the temptation of making your work, which is, for me, was all to do with India, to making that work palatable or accessible to the audience around me, which was really an audience that had never seen India, So I should not go in that direction. I did not go.
Like, you've been explaining what a dosa means and
all that crap. Dosa to kuch bhi nahi hai.
I mean, I was looking at the literary aspect of it. In books, they do explain what a dosa means and what a chutney is,
That I would do in my working hours, because I was a waitress.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, from 5 p.m. to fucking 1 a.m. every evening at Indian Oven in 1974. And that was when they really didn't know how to spell India. Aman Brothers, these Punjabi owners, would trot me out to be the bridge of the menu. So I would basically go to the tables and order for them. Okay, paneer must be eaten with this, and you cannot have 2 dals, you must have whatever it is. I would order their foods in every table, and became very popular for it. So there, we didn't serve dosa, but there I would do, cottage cheese balls fried in gravy in a mixed thing of, peas, Mattar, whatever it was. Basically, Mattar paneer. And and on a good night, I would pocket $60 in tips and go home.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and sometimes once got mugged on the way home.
This would be Cambridge, or
no, in New York City, 1974.
New York City. Right.
1974, in summers in New York. From Cambridge, we would. And Suni was across the street in a yogurt shop, selling yogurt. And
no, really?
Yeah. I was 74th Street. She was 73. So right there, it's still there, but the shops have become different.
So is that how you and Sony met, like as students back in New York City? That's how you became friends?
Not New York City. No.
Okay.
When I landed at Harvard, in Cambridge, I came as a transfer student. I came as a sophomore, second year, because I had done a year at Miranda House. And Suni had been there as a freshman a year before. And when I landed, pretty much the first question I asked was, how many Indians are here? Who can I meet? Because those days it was very unusual to go abroad for undergraduate.
Right.
So, and they said three: Suni, Taravorwala, Anand Mahindra, and another guy called Anil Delalikar. So my pilgrimage was to each one to say hi. It's a big campus.
Right.
So I went. That's how I met Suni. I went and met her at Lowell House where she lived, and yeah, that's how. So I sought her out, and that thankfully we became great friends.
And Anand Mahindra was also studying film. Would that be correct to say?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Right.
And
right.
wonderful filmmaker.
Oh,
He
really?
made a thesis film that I'll never forget. Following a holy man up a mountain. He did this one film here. Talented. He was really talented, but he's done lovely things. I mean, he's an artist in his soul, I think. But he was also our big brother. Ke वापस जाना है, देश को serve करना चाहिए. So, He used to give us lectures.
Truck बनाना है, jeep बनाना है.
नहीं, वो तो नहीं बोलता था तब.
Right. But what I find most intriguing, Mira, about your story, and at least this aspect of your story, is that when you moved to the US and you moved on a scholarship to do with theater, and and even now you identify yourself, and I've seen a lot of interviews where you say you're an actor, and that
actor to nahi, I started like that, but
right.
I love actors. Yeah.
But it's amazing that you went on a scholarship, you were an actor, you done theater here in India, and then you never acted. That was your first calling, wasn't it? That you would be acting in perhaps films or taking more professional.
No. It was always acting with a big question mark attached.
Okay.
About even from Calcutta and Delhi days. Can I change anything, with acting? Can I do something beyond it? Or will I always be at the mercy of other people's visions? I always had that question, but I loved it at the same time. But so when I went to Cambridge, I did act, by the way, all the time, for the whole year at Harvard, and I did Evita Peron, I did Arcadina in the Seagull, I did several good things, but it was all extracurricular. It was not a department, so I had to do that and the very strenuous academic courses. But in the summers, I went to New York to study with, La Mama, the great theater, the Ellen Stewart's theater, where she allowed me to just observe the gurus that I had, which were Joseph Chaikin and Andrei Sarban, and one case Peter Brook, and very importantly, Elizabeth Swados, who was making The Runaways, which was a great musical with essentially about street kids, which in hindsight, I think was definitely a seed that was planted that then became Salam Bombay later. I mean, just a seed that became something different, but that was where it began. So I did theater in the daytime in New York, and in the evening, I sold Paneer Mattar.
I'm sure you've been shown this particular picture that's doing the rounds of the internet.
Oh, God.
That's between you and Shashi Tharoor, and both of you performing at St. Stephen's College, at Shakespeare Society. You've been asked this question before, and I get a sense that you didn't like Shashi Tharoor too much. Like, did he throw a lot of big words at you? Because that's the sense I get.
No, I didn't dislike him, but I didn't like kissing him.
Which was part of the play.
Of course. Also, it was not him only. It was also how it was those days. I mean, Nazdeek bhi aao to people start catcalling. It's really ridiculous. You feel like an idiot, But yeah, we used to tease Shashi, that where did he get that accent from? And we used to tease him that his mother flew over England when she was pregnant. Wahan se thoda atmosphere aa gaya. He's always been a sport, though. He used to take it.
But you have a character in, Vivek Gombar's character in Suitable Boy, who's never been to England. Kind of inspired by Shashi Tharoor, perhaps?
No, but that's in
the book as well. Right.
And it's I love it because he's such a wannabe. Arun Mehra. Those days you used to get hired on your accent. You'd become a tea estate manager. Ki aise tu bol do, to bas you can lead the managing, and he's like he was like a con artist. I mean, he probably got by on that accent until he was called on it. Shashi was the genuine article. He's different.
But that's been the case a lot with people who moved out of India, right? I mean,
Yeah.
The fact that, Mira, you wear Indian clothes is almost like a statement you make. Is that true? Like, it's something that you want to retain what is, quote unquote, your roots. And, you don't have an American accent either, although you lived like a, majority of your years in the US. Is that something that you've taken as a thing to hold on to, or
as an oath? No, it's just who I am, and it's also what I love. The refusal to pander is across all realms. I just love our color, our handloom, the fact I love artisanship. I love everything that's handmade, and it's not handmade here, baby. Nothing's handmade here. Even the grape is injected with something. So it's just what you find your, I suppose, joy. But now it's fashionable, to take on names and all. But when I shuru se hi bola tha, if you become Sam for Samudrika, I'll come and personally beat you up. You
also have an easy name. It's easy to say Mira.
They still fuck it up.
How do you screw up Mira?
Mira Nair. Mira Nair. Right. But I don't let it. I said, you say me so much in our culture here. So say me, they would say me. Then Ra, Mira. It's very easy. But it's a question, but I do insist on it, because otherwise they just, it's extraordinary, the depth of, now it's getting a little better, but through shame and through embarrassment, which is very well deserved. But in the past, and even now, they think nothing of checking how to say your name. They think nothing of showing that respect and humility to whoever comes their way, because they always fuck up Nair. I say it's Nair like fire, then they get it, right? So I have an assistant who gave me these coffee mugs, Nair like fire. So that's what it does work.
I'm going to come back to Bombay, because that's really where we are. And I've been fascinated with, of course we spoke about it briefly, but I've been fascinated with how you are the quintessential Bombay filmmaker, in the sense of you made Salam Bombay, and I only recently watched India Cabaret, and it's a beautiful film, and it's there on YouTube for people who would like to access it. It's a city that you did not grow up in. It's a city that you had an amazing relationship with. How did that begin, and what explains it? Like, what drew you to Bombay as a city?
At first, and importantly, all the documentaries so far from India went through Bombay, but India Cabaret was wholly, I looked all over the country for a situation that I could enter into, like a cabaret dancers or women who use their bodies for a living, and how I would enter that world and then question the world around it. That was my premise, and what divides women from good and bad, and looking for literally a context to go into, and it was in Ghatkopar that I found it with Rekha and Rosie. And then I moved into a kind of chawl in Bandra, where I whitewashed 2 walls, and I lived there, and then would go and mostly stay in Antoffi. Antoffi, I never knew until months later was Antop Hill, Antoffi. And, so it was through the, I guess, underbelly of the city. That's when I really lived there for months, and Indira Gandhi was shot then, and it changed the nature of the city, etc., etc. But Suni, who was not there, I think, while I was shooting India Cabaret, I can't remember. And then I made another film in Dadar, Children of Desired Sex, which is very little seen, about a birth control, about a clinic that did amnio abortions if the fetus was a female. And so somehow these films allowed me, or brought me into that perspective of Bombay, that of course later also was very influenced and shaped by Suni, my friend's own long term. I mean, she's a Bombaya, and her access to her world, which was Gwalior Tank, and eventually then became the Grant Road Adda for the street kids that we found. That became the research, like the beginning of what became Salam Bombay in 1985 or 6, after India Cabaret. So I guess this was my roadway in. Again, without plan, it was the subjects leading me to these. But the city is such an extraordinary vibrancy about it, and especially in those days, everything was the intermingling was so palpable and so actually joyous in its vibrancy between, say, what would happen during Diwali, what would happen during Navroz, what would happen during. I mean, it was just it's very, very has great character. What can I say? So. But it was these ways, the other alleys in, and sometimes, while making those films, because it was not a pretty Bombay for sure. It was pigs careening in the mud. It was violent, and not so much only violent, but also just sort of brutal. How men treated women, especially as they were, worked the nightclubs, and my seeing all that in first hand. That I would live that way, but then long for something to soothe my, eyes. And then I would go and see my friends. I remember going to see Shekhar Kapoor, who was an old friend of mine. But I almost had no language to understand the Juhu life after living that life, And then I would go, there was one thing I would go to Kasab, this beautiful shop that still exists in Matru Ashish in Nepean Sea Road, my friend Hansa Ben's shop of handloom. And I would just sit there. No one would know me, and she would let me. And just to look at the cloth, and just to have a place that no one asked me questions, but I would just look at beauty, because to remind myself that yes, there is there, it is here. And then I would go back to Antofi, and and just wait for things to happen, and try to shape them too. But it's slow going, making that kind of film where you're just there ready to see what's going on, and hopefully capture something that is about the question you have in you. You don't know what will happen. It's an interesting way of making cinema.
Did you have a tough time, for instance, because I know that Suketu Mehta had a tough time when he wrote Maximum City, about telling one Bombay about the other. And generally, one Bombay does not, while they can see it all the time, it's in your face, but they can look through it in ways that it's very hard for people to imagine. Did you also have a tough time, like say when you're hanging out with, say, Shekhar Kapoor in Juhu, it's tough for you to make them understand the world you're coming from and what you see?
I wouldn't try.
You wouldn't even try?
No, I wouldn't try. I would go there. I would not go there to talk. I would go there to just have a break from my Antofi life. Yeah. But I'm just saying that it was a shift of gears that I was not prepared for, because I was really in a zone with the other world. And so I would not do that much. That's why I would go to Kasab, where no one would talk to me, So I would not go there to talk about the other life at all. I did not know how to, but just to get some succor, just to get some, some energy. Like nowadays in COVID, you don't meet anyone. I long to meet people because you get some energy, in that style. Itna nahi kiya humne. I used to work a lot. I used to be there a lot, because in that type of filmmaking, Mayank, you don't take holidays. It's about what's happening around you.
And you're living there.
You're living in it.
Right.
And also you're on 16 mm. It's not inexpensive. It's not digital. So you have to absorb the world so much that you have to have the discerning power to when to shoot, when to run it, because you don't have limitless stock at all. It's very careful. So you'd shoot raat ko, then I would transcribe to see what I had got, It's painstaking. But when things happen, you can never imagine that could happen.
A lot of authors, a lot of writers, for instance, who are excellent with nonfiction, don't turn out to be great fiction writers. It's almost like their disciplines are very different from each other. Would the same thing apply to feature filmmaking?
Are you trying to say gently that I should stick to nonfiction?
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm trying to see. I'm trying to get to the you moving from nonfiction to fiction, and how difficult or how different does it become in terms of the craft and the art of it?
It helps me enormously to have come from the streets, to have come from what you call the art of non-fiction, cinema verite, basically. It's cinema of truth. It's a little pretentious in sound, but it is very real as a practicing, in the sense that, like I was saying, You don't script things in that type of world. You have to be humble enough to enter the world and just be there. And then, and of course your presence is shaping it to some extent, but it's also about being a friend and an observer to the situation and eliciting things from people, sure, but as they feel them rather than you telling them what to say. That work of observing life, of working with it, not just observing it, but engaging with it, becoming a listener to people and the world. And of course, in my case, I've always been, wanting a visual way in, to that emotion. Or the visual way is something I trained in, with photography and with this and that. So what cinema verite gave me and later fiction film gave me is the ability to encompass all these three things, and so that training, I have to say, of being humble, of receiving what the world gives you, and of course going towards what provokes me, is beautiful training, I think, for making fiction, for making stories of any kind. What I've always wanted to do in the fiction making, to capture the unpredictability, the sort of crazy sizzle, if you wish, of what really happens in life. It's so beautiful. Like, now I'm in these four, surrounded by books, surrounded by my nice home, but it's just always in. And I just went outside the other day for a walk. It was just about to rain, and there was a tiny puddle, and there were three little kids in gumboots just testing whether they could walk on the water of the puddle. And I it was beautiful, where I was just saying, yeah, same, sab kuch same. And then I saw this little thing, but it's like they give you a sense of wonder again, and that's what life sometimes can do. Anyway, that's just one example, but to try and work it into the dramatic scenes, like in Suitable Boy, I had great pleasure really making those dramatic family scenes, visually, because it was things I have seen and things, it's what life has like allowed me to see in real life, and to blend that with fiction and great writers, great actors. I mean, just everything about it, set the design for it, choose the room in which the son, that Ishan scene I'm thinking of, when he goes and gets yelled at by his father and then thrown out by his father, it's a scene out of life, it's a scene out of my own. Like, we grew up in those corridors, those bungalows, those is kamre se, you see your dad, yeah, he's tiny over there, but he's looming as large as a mountain for you when you're campoing and coming home after being, not, hunting or something, whatever we did. And those perspectives, that scale, I mean, that for me all comes from having lived it, so sometimes when I can capture that, how life is really, with actors in location, it's real for me. I get, it's a real joy.
Yeah, Monsoon Wedding was precisely that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was cinema of truth, but it was also telling a story. But it seemed like it's just camera is just a fly on the wall. It's just capturing people as they're reacting. Ever since Salam Bombay, that's precisely what you try to do, which I find the most intriguing about your filmography. You've always mixed non-professional actors with professional actors, and so basically mixing documentary with feature filmmaking to just see, what that leads to, right? It's something you continue to do all through since your first film. Would that be correct?
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
And it's bizarre, some of the stuff that I've come across in terms of how you found these actors. First question, I want to get this out of the way at a very philosophical level. Mira, do you think that everyone, in effect, is an actor? That you could really cast anybody because everyone's an actor?
Not at all.
Okay.
And most look so bloody. उनका दोबड़ा देखना है 2-2 साल के लिए. So you have to be I have to be very careful whom I live with. That's very important for me. Um, no. Not everyone is an actor at all.
Right.
And it's actually several things, but mostly instinct. But the several things, a range of literally physiognomy, literally how what they are like, how the camera will see them or not. I can tell immediately if a camera will love you or not.
Right.
Or if I sometimes it doesn't matter if the camera won't love you, but then can I use that in a way like Almodovar, his girl ladies are so fantastic and they so destroy the notion of what is beautiful on a camera, but the roles want that and need that, so it depends on the role, of course.
Right.
But mostly it's intelligence. Sometimes it's the ability of comic timing. Sometimes it's just the stillness in someone that they can be, because film acting is very actually technically demanding, because you need a stillness and yet an agility and an ability to know when to be that way, and all that. It's many things.
So the reason why I'm asking you this, Mira, is because you found, for instance, Shashi Auntie in Monsoon Wedding walking in the park in Vasant Vihar, and that you found Sarita Chaudhary apparently on a bike somewhere. I mean, you couldn't have thought of all these things when you just found them on the street. Are there more stories of people you've just found and then made them actors? And then, of course, they've all had careers thereafter. So it's not like a one-time thing and then they disappear. No. Shashi Auntie plays Shashi Auntie in every film now in Bollywood.
It's amazing. And she should. Well, several like Vijay Raz.
Okay.
Vijay Raz, I was looking for to cast P.K. Dubey in Monsoon Wedding. And I was casting at Uma Dakuna's house in Churchgate. I don't know how I knew the name of Vijay Raz. She might have introduced, I don't know. But Vijay walked in and he had just come from the train station and he had just come from burying his, I think, father-in-law in Assam. So his head was fully shaved. And he had these ears that like went to the door. They were like two, Gandhi would have been, they put Gandhi, extraordinary ears and this wide mouth and this a bald head, and I was struck by how he looked. But that morning, just an hour or so before, because those days, casting happened like this, but that morning, Paresh Rawal, whom I really admired as an actor and whom I had seen in Sleuth with Nasir Bhai in England, in America, just 2 months before, called me up through the grapevine sort of and said, Yaar, Mira, maine ye role ka suna tha, and I would love to play it if you want me to, sort of thing. And I, really liked him, and I had seen him 2-3 months before, and I sort of, I think I said yes, and then in walks Vijay Raz, and so the role had been cast. So I was struck by him, but I did not ask him to audition because it was gone. Then I went back to Delhi and so on. And we had this socialist experiment going on with Monsoon Wedding where we had this workshop and everyone had to join the workshop. But Paresh, who had agreed to all that, could not join the workshop. So then I took Alice Tilottama, who was a young girl on a
first timer.
Again, a corridor of LSR.
And you found in the corridor of LSR?
She was found by, I think, Dilip Shankar in a corridor LSR, and then was brought to me in audition. And she was instantly Alice. And so I had my Alice, and I had the three nuts, Dubhendu, Sanyal. In fact, I just saw him yesterday in Mirzapur. So I had my nuts and I had Alice, and we all got onto the bloody second-class train from Delhi, and we taka to Bombay so that we could rehearse with Paresh. And Nasir Bhai gave us his flat above, and we went there and set up for the rehearsals. And ding dong, and the door opened, and it was Paresh. And I was just, my eyes fell out of my, because he had gained probably 30 pounds or 40 pounds since, a lot of weight since I saw him. And this was the love story of Monsoon Wedding, the tent wala, and
Right.
this made the dewdrop. So I was really taken aback, but he was such a great actor and all that. So I said, okay, let's start. And we started rehearsing, and I had a digital camera and I was shooting. And I was getting more worried by the minute because he looked like her father, which was the other story. But he's great. Anyway, and then we finished 2 days of this. And anyway, he took me to the airport. He was lovely. And he said, I'll just lose it. And I said, lose it? We are going to be shooting in literally 4 days from then. And nahi, bilkul, and all. Then things happened. And I went back to Delhi and I showed the footage to Declan, my cinematographer. And I said, Declan, what can we do here? Because it's really a problem. And Declan thought that we could light it and do some things. And I said, no, I really felt that this... And I expected that Paresh Bhai would say, cast another new girl to work with me. But he didn't. When I called him up, I said, Paresh Bhai, I can't. He said, I just know this is going to be super special and everything. I said, Paresh Bhai, I'm so sorry. I can't do it, And he said so beautifully and graciously, he said, I just know this is going to be a beautiful thing, which I didn't know. I thought it was a little flick that I was doing. He said, I just want the best for it. So please take all my blessings, please. And I hung up. And, my crew, they were like, that was Paresh Rawal. And I had Naseer Uddin Shah, greatest. Right. But I didn't, it was no other actors of that nature, stature. And then I thought, I was also, and I thought of the man with the ears and the widest mouth in the world, Vijay Raj. And I had not even auditioned him, but I loved his look. So I called him up and I said, Vijay, can you come? And, and everyone was being paid 75,000 rupees. It was a flat rate, all of us.
Including Naseer. Naseer would be a little more.
I think so, but not much more. And he said, haan ji, main aa jaunga. And he got on a train and he came with his 1-year-old child because his wife was still in Assam or something. And we had to hold his baby when I said action. It was that thing. But I as soon as, and I didn't know how he performed, frankly. I just loved his look. And he had this praying mantis body and all. I loved his look. I tell you, the first shot was when he comes in with the goons and say, "Yaar, ayo, ₹1 ka zamana chale gaya," and all. He was just riveting. And I invented any hour, any minute that we had. I invented scenes with him, and with Sabrina, and we just kept adding to his story. It added while we were shooting. There was never any that he goes home and he weeps and all that was added while shooting, because Vijay was so brilliant,
right.
And so fantastic, and so that was how that happened.
It's incredible the number of people right here in Bombay who made their debuts with your film as a result, right? I mean, Nana Patekar made his debut in Salam Bombay. Ram Kapoor made his debut. Randeep Hooda made his debut.
Irfan and Randeep.
Irfan made his debut, right?
Yes.
Right. Did you see Irfan going that far in life in terms of accomplishments?
Yeah. But also, because Irfan, in his blood, took risks. A lot of people in that time, 80s and 90s, the chocolate boys of cinema, like the real, they were happy where they were in the struggle of what they knew. Not many looked away from beyond that. It was almost scary to them. So Irfan wasn't like that. He was always a worldly soul. He always looked anywhere it took him.
The other thing I want to touch on, and that's again very unique to you, is music. And I've heard you say this before, that actually 50% of the time that you spend thinking about visuals, you give to music as well. 50% of your mind space goes to music. That's a crazy amount of thinking that goes. And of course that shows, because I mean the soundtrack, for instance, of Monsoon Wedding remains one of the finest soundtracks ever, right? I mean, from Anu Malik to Farida Khanum is like the full range, as it were, a full bouquet. I like, for instance, with The Suitable Boy, I mean, that song, Barkhast, Meryl, I mean,
Barkhast Hui.
it's stuck in my head for the past so many days. It's an earworm. But I think the one thing that stuck still since has to be Ye Mera Deewanapan Hai, Mira.
Yeah.
I mean, to get Sushila Raman to sing it. She performed in Bombay. I was at the concert and I was in the front row, so she could see me. And I kept saying "Ye Mera Deewanapan Hai," and she would look through me because she doesn't sing it in concerts. Because I don't know, because that's not the kind of singer she is, right? You just pick up someone from a completely different style and give them a song which is completely different. How did that song come about?
That song she had actually recorded, Mayank. I didn't make her record. That I have this great visionary friend called Amita Nanji. She's an artist in Los Angeles, and in the early years, this type of music was still quite rare, and we all were kind of aficionados. Basement Bhangra, or whatever it was, Asian Jolly, all that stuff. IC 408, that lovely song I used, I think in Namesake. Indian Airlines announcing the flight to Calcutta. I just love that song. So all that was super new, and yet so much a part of who I was. It was great. So Amita Nanji introduced me to Sushila Raman's music period, and I was listening to it. And there is one album in which she has,
She has, okay.
And it's this gorgeous sort of, kind of cute up version, like Mira Deewanapan. I mean, she's who she is. She's screwing up the pronunciation. Everything is good, but she's doing it with such spirit. I loved it, and it was perfect for the namesake because of who Gogol and Moshmi were. They were these two Bengalis who were kind of not, who were more. One was French, the other one was like American, and didn't know who the hell they were, and that was what the song felt like. And yet they had, of course, seen Bollywood stuff or whatever. They wanted to be their own stars in their honeymoon night. So for me, it was like that. How to make something, have some jazz, pep to it, So it's not just Sohagrat like you've seen before. Especially not for these kind of diaspora kids who really have no real roots, just echoes of roots. And her song had that same thing,
right. Right.
So I asked her for the rights, and we bought them, and then it became a hit after that.
Huge. I mean, I was under the impression that maybe she doesn't like singing it because she's asked to sing that song everywhere. It was like a niche concert, so probably her real fans, I don't know.
I think she was shy. She must have been shy in India to
sing in that
sing it that way, because in India,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even my husband, he's older, and he knows Ye Mera Deewan. He knows the real song, and
right.
So he said, "Ye kya yaar, kya baj raha hai?" He can't take it even it's something else. But that's probably why she doesn't sing it in India.
Mira, another thing, and what you share with the love for music, what you share as almost like as a filmmaking culture is with a whole lot of Bombay filmmakers. There's a whole category of Bombay filmmakers who've been great because they had the ear for music. They people love, say, it could be anyone. It could be from a Yash Chopra to a Subhash Ghai. There is a certain soundtrack that is typically theirs. Which is not true for the Western filmmaking culture. I'm amazed, Mira, because of I'm just here talking about music. Have you never been offered films by Bombay filmmakers in all these years, like the Yash Chopras of the world, to make something which would be because you're such a music-oriented filmmaker?
I haven't.
That's amazing.
But I'm not looking for that either.
I'm sure.
But I have real lovely friendships with them. Really, I mean, Yash Johar, I was very close to. He was the production manager of one of my films from Buddha when Warner Brothers. In 1991, I traveled the whole country with Yash, and we were very close. And I loved him, and I think it was mutual. But never like this, कि हाँ जी picture करना मेरे लिए and all. And I really respect Adi Chopra. I really like what he does, and I really like his mind. And I had taken him an idea that not for me to do, but for us to do together, kind of thing. I think they think correctly that I just make my own movies.
Right. That's another aspect of your filmography. What exists is amazing to begin with, but what doesn't exist, where you were close to making stuff, or you said no to. Like, I was quite surprised to know that you'd said no to Devil Wears Prada. You would have directed Meryl Streep. That would have been an amazing thing to do. Why did you say no to that?
I don't remember now, but I'm very nihilistic like that, I suppose. I just said no, I just turned down something also very huge. Actually, that's the day I fell down in the khadda.
Oh.
I think a big part of the criteria is, can anyone else make this film? And I think that must have been the reason for Devil Wears Prada. But in another time, it would have probably been very interesting to me, because I do love fashion, and and that world is crazy, and Meryl Streep is a goddess. But I don't think it came to that type of it was just initial meetings. But generally, I give this vibe, कि यार ये आप बहुत लोग हैं, you can go and find them. It doesn't need to be me. And now I feel that, I think, a little more, Mayank, because I really know that life is short, and I do know that creative energy is not, I always say it is not limitless, but it's a question of, if you don't do this, then it's not so much if you're not doing something, it's also what you're not doing because you're doing something.
Right.
A little bit like that.
Right.
So yeah, sometimes it might have been folly too.
Did you regret the fact that Shantaram didn't work out with
I only regretted that I gave 1.5 years full tilt of my life to it, and we really had a good thing going. I really regret that amount of time that was lost, But I don't regret, because they were starting it again and all. But I was not interested.
Because you've been such an inspirational figure for a lot of filmmakers across the world. It'd be great if I could hear some stories which actually, give your vulnerable side away. In a sense, like, I did come across one where you're talking about a low phase in your career, Mira, which was in the mid '90s when you made Kama Sutra. And I have not heard too many filmmakers say this about their work. You said it did not turn out to be the way you wanted it to. Not too many people say that openly. What was that phase like? Was that a slump for you, and that's something that you recovered from, and how you did?
Yeah, it was. And I remember, like feeling like I wanted to burn every print that existed of that film. But it was it also dovetailed with moving to Cape Town, where, I had to go for 3 years. My husband was heading the African Studies department and at the university. And so it was dovetailing with, forever feeling a novelty, wherever it was. And our son was 6, and I wanted to not leave him, much to go off and make movies for years on end somewhere. So it was a dovetailing of all those things that definitely was like a malaise. I didn't quite know how to work it. We made My Own Country, Suni, and wrote the script. We made this beautiful 2-month film with Abraham Verghese, and that was good. That's the thing, I have to keep doing things, making things. And it was in that wandering that I found myself making the film Laughing Club of India on this. In my state of malaise, I thought, let me make a absurd film. I didn't even know it would be, but let me pursue people who take laughing seriously. Usme to kuch milega juice. But also it was losing my way a bit, not knowing what to put to my energy in. And look at what happens, that film and the shooting of the film in the rain and using old Hindi movie songs sort of on its own kind of began to become the seed of what then became the style of Monsoon Wedding. And so that's what I also share with people, is that, to be fallow is also important, because it can give birth to fruition. Because if you're always on the hamster wheel and always, so much of what you can do, I think, and I see it with people who produce volumes of stuff, you lose rigor. Sometimes you lose the discerning power of what is good and what is not. And which is not to say I don't lose it. I still lose that too. I just have really recognized that you have to perennially be a student of life. You perennially feed yourself with what's going on with life, in order to be able to think anew, or to bring something, to the table with art, or with even art now, I say with more ease than I could before. But for me, that's important,
But do you
to.
usually move on, Mira, or is there once you put a work out there, do you look for responses, or it's just out there in public? Now it doesn't matter what people say, people don't say, because these things are subjective in any case. The response, for instance, with A Suitable Boy, have you been tracking what people have been saying? Like, would you, as a filmmaker, like really read the reviews, for instance, or would you, because now there's nothing you can do with what you made, so why care and why not move on to other things? Is that how it works for you?
Yes, I don't read too much, because sort of what's the point, and I do protect myself with other fuel, and it's a protection, that I'm creatively absorbed in another world. So I'm not as open to waiting to hear your words. Social media is an interesting, weird thing where I just get a kind of vibe of it, rather than actually read,
Right.
a full tilt reviews. And especially if they have something nasty in the headline, I just.
But would there be a common sort of a feedback that you would look at? For instance, with A Suitable Boy, Mira, like a common feedback has been the fact that a lot of people, looked at the dialogue and they felt it wasn't in sync with the characters. For instance, they felt that the language wasn't like getting it. Did people really talk like that in the 1950s? I mean, is that something that you would perhaps look at and say, okay, maybe did I like maybe I could have done it differently, or that was what you wanted, and now it's that is what it is.
I tempered a fair amount of dialogue that I could in the making of Suitable, primarily getting 20% of it back into Urdu, Hindustani, and Avdi, which was never the case before, and they didn't even think of it. Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor speaking only in Hindustani, I tempered a lot of the balance of language. And often, as much as I could, change the overtly English quality of some of the sentences. But, people don't realize that a lot of the dialogue is from the book. Right. And the book, and and in the 50s, people did speak like that. We spoke a clean English, and we were taught to speak like I'm speaking, a kind of enunciated, clearer, slightly elocution infused English, which is very different from come on, what's up? It's very different from now. And we don't hear that English much. And so that was that can be the sort of response, but it is correct to the time. And it is definitely actually mostly correct to the book. So I do stand by that, really. And people spoke differently, very carefully differently. Like Ishan's character, Man's character, he spoke like you speak now more. He was like I would tell him, you're the kid from the Kapoor family who went to Doon School. You're not Pran Mehra, who speaks like he went to Allahabad University. But the way Arun Mehra speaks, he speaks because he wants to be an Angrez. He talks all the time like that, and not just like that, but even the phrases, because his bosses talk like that. So I feel like we were very nuanced, in fact, with language. But it is a world that people literally don't know now, and they don't hear that quality. But I don't get that comment from my mother's generation, because that was the world that was familiar. So I know that it's new, different on the ear, but I stand by it. I mean, of course, if it were from the get-go written by someone else, it could be different. But the book is what we've really largely followed.
Because you make all these films on identity, and identity is so important to your cinema and to your work. You identify yourself as Pagli everywhere on social media. You're called Pagli.
Don't
Pagli
forget
G. Pagli G on Facebook and on Twitter. What's up with Pagli? Who calls themselves Pagli? That makes no sense.
Pagli is my nickname from childhood.
No shit, really?
Yeah.
So your siblings call you Pagli?
Yeah, Pugly is my nickname. And the thing is that when social media even began as a concept, which I didn't even really, clock into, my son did. I think he made me go on social media when we were opening Reluctant Fundamentalist. And he said, "What's the name, Ma?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want my name on it because I thought I'd just be hounded beyond." So I just said Pugly here. And because people call me GV and all that, usko bhi laga diya, Pugly Ji. Honored mad person. Very good. I don't mind.
Mira, please stay as mad as you are, and thank you for the movies. This was amazing. Hope to see you
Thank you,
soon in the
Mayank.
real world. Hopefully.
Okay, inshallah.
Cheers.
Hope so.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Bye.
Subscribe to Midday India. Get direct notifications on all our videos by clicking on the bell icon.